recorded is not. I mean, if you guys ever want to get promoted, get Pat Wazowski to record something you do. Nationwide. Those things have been in a long, long time. But yeah, I am, by the way, if peak memberships are free, I nominate myself to the board. Yeah, I'm all about free books, so that's how it works. What's the requirement? When you have to have to meet?
A heart for people.
That's all?
Yes.
No qualification for what that means exactly.
Not this year.
All right. Free books, all right. But yeah, I am Ryan Sprague, and if I understand the connection, I spoke to the co-op, one of the co-ops, not the co-op. I spoke to our co-op a few weeks back, a month ago maybe. Apparently it's the co-op. I was at that one. And spoke at it. And so I was there and I talked to the kids, talked to the students there in a worldview context about relationships. And it was suggested that I come and offer a similar kind of a message to you guys here tonight. And Mark did a very good job of introducing me and tell you who I am. A little more background. I was raised in the church, sort of. My parents were Catholic, and we were raised loosely Catholic. I'm the fifth of 6 children. And for my 4 older sisters, they were pretty much raised Catholic. They went to Catholic school. Catholicism was a heavier part of their life. But by the time my brother and I were growing up, it was not nearly as big of a deal. And we stopped going to church altogether when I was probably 10 years old, something like that. And so I had no church experience whatsoever as I kind of grew up. My church experience that I did have was negative. I had a real negative association with the church. I didn't understand God, and I had no real deep questions or theology or why I'm here. I just didn't like the fact that there was authority in the church and they didn't let me do whatever I wanted to. And I just kind of rebelled. And again, rebelled in 10-year-old kind of ways. You know, I wanted to eat snacks in class and that kind of stuff. But they did not let me do that stuff, and it got me frustrated. And it wasn't until I got to college that I actually came to faith. And I became a Christian in 1997 as a freshman at Florida State University, which is one of the things, you know, I do talk about that in the book. And there's no real nice way to transition from, you know, the football memoir book that we're going to talk about here tonight. So there's my blank. I will share my faith story in there, and I talk about some life lessons about being on that team and being a part of that. And one of the fun things that writing that book did was it opened up the writing outlet for me. I've enjoyed writing. I never thought I would have. And so for all of you youngsters that are sitting here, there's many things you may think you would never do that you might find yourself doing and liking one of these days, which is a very bizarre reality, but it's true of me. I'm a writer now. And you could ask my grammar teachers in middle school, elementary school, high school, college, they would never have said that to me. So yeah, I'm supposed to talk about relationships tonight. And not talking about friend relationships, specifically the relationships between males and females. So we're going to talk about tonight. And I'm going to talk about it in the context of what they are, what they should be, and trying to give a basic foundation of the purpose of marriage and the relationship that leads up to marriage. Okay? So they've asked me to talk about relationships, which I find kind of ironic, because looking back on my dating days, I don't know how much it qualifies me. I had one relationship in middle school, and it consisted of 3 basic parts. I received a note from across the gym, and the note asked me if I would go with this girl. I said I would. We sat next to each other at lunch a couple times, and then I received a note a couple days later telling me that we had broken up. That relationship, short-lived, but that was my dating relationships in middle school and high school, all wrapped up in there. When I got to college, I had my first exclusive relationship. You know, one guy, one girl, let's get serious and talk about things. And it began with an evangelical intent, and it ended steeped in sin and full of heartache and brokenness. And it was a really bad deal. The 3rd relationship I ever had in my life, I am still in, and it's to my wife. And we're getting ready to have our 10-year anniversary this March, and we have 4 sons. So, you know, all that, the fact that I was a college football player, that I was in a week-long relationship in middle school, and that I've had 2 relationships in my life, qualifies me now as the expert. And so I would love to now educate all of you on the secrets and the meanings and all that kind of stuff. So dating courtship, Mark was telling me it's a big deal. By the way, we are homeschoolers too, my wife and I. Whatever that means, I'm learning that homeschooler has a certain idea in everybody's mind. Very few people have the same idea as other people. In North Carolina, we were introduced to the idea of homeschooling, where I was a youth pastor, and I was introduced to it by this militant group of homeschoolers who were out to get me fired. And they thought, you know, you're bad, you're fighting the church, it's horrible, you know, this is a bad deal. And we had some very tough conversations with folks, and so my first picture of homeschooling was like, whoa. settle down a little bit. I'm not the end of this, right? But as we came to the process, we were kind of introduced to some of the different teachings. We were introduced to the ideas of what homeschooling is about. We began to see the scriptural value of being the ones to be the caregivers and the educators of your children, right? And that became a cool thing to us. And now we are homeschoolers, and it's a part of what we do. And in the homeschool context, we were 6.5 years up in North Carolina, and one of the big things that kept coming up, we don't want our children to stay in youth group because of, what do you guys think? Relationships. Goodness great. Dating. It's all just this one big hormone fest. We don't want our girls there because that's all the guys are into. We don't want our guys there because the girls dress immodestly. It was all about relationships. And then you get into the homeschool room and listen to the homeschoolers, and they're debating with one another whether or not you should date or whether or not you should be doing courtship, and what it looks like, and how old you can be, and whether or not you can be 16 or 18, or wait till you get to college, or what does courtship mean if you do have courtship? Is it the dad's job to go out and find the wife or the husband to bring? I mean, all the little minutia that became a debate within the homeschool group or between homeschoolers that are Christian and conservative, and the whole idea of where other kids are. I mean, that became the debate. Well, I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff tonight. It's just, those are application issues. Those are issues to me that are conversations that need to happen between a father, a mother, and their children, and within the fellowship of believers in which you participate. I don't believe there's a scriptural mandate that anybody can point to that said God absolutely prohibits dating. Dating didn't exist when the Bible was being penned. You can take principles from Scripture. You can see areas where God speaks about a certain area. You can say, because of this principle, we are not going to let our children date exclusively. And I would endorse that completely. But I don't think I'm in a position to speak dogmatically and say, you cannot let someone date until they're this certain age and it has to look like this. There's nothing I can do that right now. I believe that's the responsibility of a mother, a father, their children to have. Right? That being said, I want to share two verses, one passage about this issue, and it's all I'm going to talk on the matter. It is going to be one thing speaking to the kids, one thing speaking to the adults, in the application of when to date, who to date, what dating looks like, if it's called dating, if it's called courtship, what is it all going to look like in this? The first one I'll read is for the kids. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, that you may live long in the land. Same thing I said to any one of my high schoolers that have ever asked me about dating. I would say, what do your parents say? And whatever your parents say, that's what goes. Here? I mean, that's easy. If you want to have any question about the biblical principles, it doesn't matter if your best friend's parents say they can date and they're 12. It doesn't matter. What matters is what your mother and father say. And the thing that you're responsible to do as a young person is to honor God with your life. And you are commanded in the Old Testament and the New to honor your mother and father. Right? So if your parents hold the idea that you can't date until you're eligible to be president, 35 it is. But understand this. I understand, one, from working with teenagers for a long time, but two, from being one myself, that sometimes the restrictions our parents put on us can seem unfair, can seem tough, can seem burdensome. And hear that in this passage, I think God understands the plight that a young person has who's maturing and growing and trying to develop their place in the world, and trying to understand how that fits within the parameters of culture, society, and specifically the church and our families, that it's tough and there's tension there. He gives you the promise, honor your mother and father, and it will go well with you. So what I want you to hear from that is that you may not feel like it's fair. You may not like the restriction your parents put on you. You may not like that they just determine the way you should dress, or that they say who you can or can't date or when. You may not like the fact that your parents' standard seems to be more conservative than someone else's parents' standard. But hear this. God promises to bless you if you respectfully obey and honor your parents. Hear that. You're commanded to do it. Honor them. But He promises to bless you if you will do that. So hear that. So whatever they say goes. We're not going to debate how it looks. I just say whatever mom and dad say, that's what you need to do. That's your job. All right, so now parents, the flip side. The next verse in that passage, Ephesians 6:4, says this. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Just want to read a couple statements that talk about that phrase, provoke your children or exasperate your children. This first one comes from Richard Erickson from the Baker Bible Commentary. He says this: avoidance of capricious, dictatorial, inconsistent treatment which provokes resentment in children. If you provoke your children to anger, dictatorial, capricious, inconsistent. George E. Harper says this from International Bible Commentary. It is easier to be severe or indulgent, but children need discipline and admonition when combined with a gentle understanding of their needs and limitations. So hear this, Mom and Dad. Have rules. Set boundaries. But be a teacher. Be a teacher. Kids don't understand always. And there's a time for a kid, again, working with toddlers, you see it all the time. There's a time absolutely for me to tell my kid no, and he says no, and he gets no questions in the matter. There's no debating it, right? And there's going to be that time all the way to your kids probably married out of the house. It's I'm the dad, I'm the mom, I say no, just obey, right? But there's also a time, there's a place for us to educate our children. Because we don't want our kids to be simply results of coercive parenting from us. That whenever we're with them, we have our thumb on them, and they do exactly what we tell them to do when they're with us. But when they're not with us, they have no understanding for why it is we're telling them to do what we're telling them to do. So when they get out from underneath us, their mind begins to wander. They begin to get creative, they begin to get curious, and they don't understand. So it's incumbent upon us, fathers, mothers, especially in this area of relationships, to have our boundaries, have our rules, but be able to show our kids why we have those boundaries and why we have those rules. To be able to teach them and educate them as to why we say what we say. To be honest with them, to be able to say, for instance, say a rule in your house is, you're not going to date until you're 16. Okay? You got to explain to your kids, no, the Bible does not say you have to be 16 to date. But it does say this, and it does say this, and because these principles, we want to do this, and my job is to protect your virtue. That's what I'm trying to do here. Teach them. Educate them. Be consistent. It's not appropriate, Dad or Mom, for you to tell your daughter you can date when you're 15. And then when she turns 15 to say, no, you can't date. It's inconsistent. That will provoke anger. Now, if you want to sit down with her and go, okay, I should have said 15, I should have said mature. I should have said, you can't date until you're mature. You better be able to define what mature is. You better be able to explain to your young person, either 6 or 7 now, if they start asking the questions, what is maturity? What do I need to be striving for as a kid to be mature enough that you would let me experience a relationship? Don't have it be this shadowy, gray idea that is based on your subjective interpretation that they can never live up to because it would change and it floats. Tell them what it is. You can't tell your 13-year-old boy you can date as soon as you get your grades up. And then he comes up with straight A's like next semester and tell him I didn't mean that, right? You can't do that. We can't do that as parents. Now, I'm not saying parents. You have to be totally and completely, without error, every statement you ever make to your child because you can never go back on it. Not at all. I'm simply saying you can't just be kind of arbitrary and inconsistent without sitting down and talking with your kids about what's going on. Again, I am not being a proponent of like modern day psychology that says you have to be utterly concerned about the self-esteem of your child. Again, we are the parents. We get to wear the parent tag. We get to tell our kids because I said so. I think that's totally legit. But I think in that, because I said so, you're not changing my mind, we can explain what we're doing. Okay? It says all I really want to say about this issue is be firm, protect the virtue of your kids, but be a teacher. Okay? And however you want to apply that in your home, within your context of fellowship, do so. Alright? Let's get to the heart of the matter. We're going to look at the purpose of relationships between males and females, marriage relationships specifically, and the relationship that leads up to marriage. You can call it a courtship, you can call it a betrothal, you can call it an engagement, you can call it dating, whatever you want to call it, marriage and the relationship that leads up to that marriage. Alright, and since marriage is the hinge upon which this door is hung, I want to share one of my cornerstone beliefs about marriage. Okay? This belief affects the way I interpret Scripture in marriages and the way I interpret Scripture in relation to relationships in general. It's this idea. I believe that God designed and gave us marriage as a human relationship that's supposed to give us a picture of a divine relationship between Jesus and the church. I think that's why it exists. I think that's what it's there for. There's other things that come out of it. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But fundamentally, it's a human relationship that gives us a picture of a divine relationship between Jesus and the church. Okay, that's my cornerstone belief. Okay, that being said, I'm a guy who believes in the permanence view of marriage. The permanence view of marriage belief simply states this. If you get married, stay married forever. That's the permanence view of marriage. Right? Oftentimes it's stated in the negative. No divorce, no remarriage ever. I simply say if you're married, stay married forever. That's the permanence view. Okay, this is where I get that from. Mark 10, 11 through 12 says this. And he said to them, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. Romans 7, 2 through 3 says, for a married woman is bound by law to her husband while he lives. But if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage. Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law. If she marries another man, she is not an adulteress. And then finally, Mark 10, 7 through 9 says, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. You get married, stay married. Period. Right? However, there's other people who hold a different view of divorce and remarriage than I do. And they believe there are exceptions. And there's two. They believe, one, there's an exception for adultery. That if one of the spouses commits adultery, the other person is justified to be divorced and potentially justified to remarry. And the other is if there's an unbelieving spouse and that unbelieving spouse just abandons them. But they are then also justified. They get that from these passages. Matthew 19:9 says, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. Right? So that except for immorality. And that's where the debate is, what the word is in porneia, and what does porneia mean. Look in the Old Testament, the debate happens there, and it rages. Okay. This is now about the abandonment one. 1 Corinthians 7:15. If the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. Right? Now there's some wildly intelligent people that are God-fearing, God-loving Bible expositors who can speak to you in fluent Greek and Hebrew, have like a picture memory, the whole thing, and they're going to be on opposite sides of this conversation. Some are going to be permanency people. I am. Some are going to be exception clause people, right? And we can debate that. Churches can debate that. And I believe it's possible to coexist. But I want you to understand something about me. My understanding that a marriage is a human relationship designed to give us a picture of a divine relationship between God and the church. That being my cornerstone belief, that belief interprets the way I interpret those verses that seem to be challenging. Because I believe that it's a picture of God and the church, because God won't abandon us in the church, and because we're the ones that offend against God over and over and over again, and yet He maintains His relationship to us. I believe that's my responsibility in marriage. And no matter what my wife ever does to me, no matter what she might do to me, no matter how evil she may be to me, my job is to honor God by being forgiven. And the same is true for her. That's how I believe it. Okay? All the reason I wanted to say that is to show you how my cornerstone belief, my foundational belief, affects the way I interpret other relationships. My belief that marriage is forever. It's permanent. It's significant. It's a picture of what God is doing in the world. Affects the way I interpret relationships. So understand that as I'm talking to you today, tonight, that is my foundational belief. That's where I'm coming from. Okay? So I want you just to understand that, just to hear that. I'm not going to debate the issue of that. That's the reality. There's books. That's all I've been reading for the last 2 years of my life is marriage books about what is the purpose of marriage. Can you divorce? Can you not divorce? If you can divorce, if and where and when. And, I mean, the other day I got one, and I love John Piper, I love Bodie Bachman, I love Wayne Grudem, I love a lot of these guys. And Tim Keller is another one that I really love. And his new book came out, The Meaning of Marriage. And again, because I'm kind of I can get sometimes a little bit dogmatic, I was excited to find Keller's books for sure. He was another permanence guy. But I was another guy and have him to show him, go, yeah, it's not just Piper and Bachman and me. You know, there's also, wow. I imagine if John Piper or Bodie Bachman would ever see this and see that I bunch myself. Anyhow, normally that's what you get. You know, there's only 3 people on the planet that believe in the permanence view, and they're all kind of crazy. And now I was hoping Keller's going to be one too. Of course, Keller's going to be one. He's a Presbyterian, he's hardcore, he loves Piper. He's not. And when I read that he's not, I was like, oh, geez. I was like punching the gut. I got to get rid of all these Keller books. That's not true. I should just say that to say that somehow, some way, people that are very, very much more well-educated than I am have different views on that. So we're not going to debate that today either. I just wanted you to see my underlying value. The purpose is this. is your view and understanding of marriage will affect the way you see all relationships going forward, especially for young people, which is why I want you to have a good understanding of what marriage is and what it's about. Because if you understand that, all the other questions about dating and relationships with guys and girls can be filtered better. You've got a better understanding of it. Consider this. If you've got a selfish view of marriage, which is the most modern idea, again, we can debate, church, the different reasons why someone might get divorced, but we can all agree that culture right now has a very self-absorbed view of relationships and marriage particularly, right? We get into it because we want to be happy. We want to be fulfilled. We want to have our identity. We want to be able to tell our mother that we finally have a husband or a wife. We want to be able to provide grandkids. I mean, it really becomes a very self-absorbed approach. And when we have a self-absorbed approach, it's about my happiness and my fulfillment. It leads to things like infidelity. It leads to things like promiscuity. It leads to things like cohabitation without being married, because you want to be able to have all of your freedom. You want to be able to have the freedom to walk out of that relationship at any moment, but yet also have all the benefits of being married. Selfish. And when we're selfish in the way we view marriage, we're selfish in the way we view our relationships. And I'm hoping, and we'll see today, that you won't be selfish when you view marriage, and then you won't be selfish as you view relationships. So let's look at this. As a brief aside, I just want to touch on this. Again, we may disagree about whether or not there's zero justification for marriage, or whether or not there's one, adultery, or whether or not there's two, adultery and the abandonment of an unbelieving spouse. But beyond that, God is absolutely, unequivocally clear. If it is not adultery, which could be debated, and it is not abandonment by an unbelieving spouse, which could be debated, there are no grounds for divorce. There are no grounds for remarriage after that divorce. And we got to speak up in this church. I mean, you read anything these days about the issue of homosexuality becoming pervasive in the culture. Ultimately, what is that? That's a shot. That's an attack at the creation order. There's male, there's female. They're created. They're created for one another. They're created to be joined together. And we get mad about homosexuality, church. We're getting mad that it's violating the creation order. And every day that we yell, and that we scream, and that we picket, and that we write books, and we read blogs that are saying homosexuality is so wrong, we've got to be saying the same thing about this idea of flippant, casual, no-fault divorce is wrecking our churches. It is wrecking our states, it is wrecking our cultures, it's wrecking our homes. Pastors, elders in the church, just brothers and sisters in the Lord, we have to come alongside our friends and our family when they're struggling. It is not to throw a yoke or a burden upon them. It is to say to them, listen, what you're going to do is a bad idea. It's going to make everything else harder for the whole rest of your life. It's not honoring to God. You're not being obedient as a believer. You can't just say, I don't love them anymore. That's a lie. We have to speak up, church. It is destroying our society. If we want to hold up marriage and define it as one man and one woman, and we want to go about making a big deal about DOMA or making it defined in our state, if we want to make that a big deal, we better make it a big deal about being one man and one woman, and they don't give them the freedom to divorce whenever they want. We've got to speak up, church. Bear in mind, you're sitting in this room, and you've been divorced, and you've been remarried, and you look back on it, and you understand that it is not a divorce and remarriage biblically justified. It's grace. It's a great book. It's a great book called Divorce in Your Marriage or Permanence View. And in that, there's a cool paragraph that articulates well the incredible paradoxical blessing that is God blessing and restoring marriages that might have started off on faulty footing. God does that. It's a miracle, and all we can say is thank you, God, for that. So there's grace, absolutely grace covered in Him. So what I'm speaking to you now, though, is from this moment in your life forward. Whatever your relationship is now, forward. Young people, as you get into relationships going forward, it's a big commitment. It's a life commitment. You're not going to get out of it easily. And if I were your pastor, or I were your brother or sister in the Lord, I'd be all up in your business, not let you quit. We should be that to each other. Just an aside. Just an aside. So that's what we're talking about. No middle ground. You heard it though? No fault divorce. Right? Florida's no fault state, right? You want to start making a difference politically? Get that law changed. Shift that one, right? Make it hard at least. Make them fight with it for a year or two. Maybe go through the court system. Maybe whatever we got to do. Change that one. I don't love them anymore. You work with a couple 2 years. I fell in love with someone else. This isn't what I expected. They won't change. We laugh, but God, we hear it. We work with couples at all. We read marriage books at all. That idea, I expected something a little bit different when they married me. I expected a change. I expected a transition. I expected a maturity, and it hasn't happened. Therefore, I'm out of this. We don't have that freedom. Hear this. We're going to get to the idea here. I believe there's one primary reason why divorce happens, why marriages fall apart. Right? And it's this primary reason. I believe that almost every marriage that starts begins in adulthood, begins as an affair. And that affair that a marriage starts with is what ends up crippling most every marriage and has them ending in divorce. The issue is this. I believe that almost every single person that gets married is actually in love with themselves. And they're committing adultery when they try to give themselves to someone else. And they've never gotten to the place of conquering self. They haven't even begun to think about conquering self. They're all about them and their needs and their desires and their wants. And they're just hoping this other person will fulfill their needs and their desires and their wants. And when they don't, their love for self overwhelms their love for the other person. And so they say something like, I don't love you anymore. Or they say something like, I fall in love with someone else. Or it's not what I expected. Or I expected a different thing. And what they're basically saying is this. And hear this. What you're saying to someone else is, I love me a whole lot more than I'm willing to love you. Notice those two things. I love me more than I'm willing to love you. I had a friend of mine describe it like this with kids. He's at Camp Counselor in South Carolina. He described, especially young people, middle school kids, high school kids, college kids, and this whole dating thing that's all about me and my identity and being fulfilled and being sustained. And he described it like a kid. You know, they're just these kind of parasitic things. They're all dependent upon a host to make themselves feel fulfilled. And what happens though, you get two middle school kids, what happens is you end up with two kids and no dog. It's a good illustration. Unfortunately, I think it goes beyond middle school and high school kids. It goes to a lot of the marriage relationships that I'm watching. It's two people clinging to a love for themselves, hoping that other person's going to make them feel better, and frustrated why it's not working. The excuses you hear, the statements you hear that make, still don't love themselves. Struggling. I love me more than I'm willing to love you. So beyond that, beyond the foundational purpose of marriage, right? It's a human relationship designed to give us a picture of a divine relationship between the bride and the church. I see two other reasons, there's probably more, but what's another one of the reasons for marriage? Another reason we have marriage. Procreation. Procreation. Genesis, right? God blessed them and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. That means have more of you. Procreate. Beget more of you. Have children, right? One of the reasons we are to be married is to have children. Have, more humans on the planet. Multiply. Fill the earth. Be evangelistic. Be disciplers, right? One of the reasons. Another one of the reasons is this. I believe one of the reasons we're called to be in marriage is to be more conformed into the image of Christ. Listen to this passage from Colossians 3. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you. So you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Now that verse is not speaking to marriage. That's not within the context of a marriage idea. It's speaking to just the Christian, the believer. But I ask you this. Anybody who's been married, longer than 3 or 4 days, is there any relationship on this planet that forces you to be more humble? That forces you to willfully be kind? To put another needs above your own? To be long-suffering? To be forgiving? To look at yourself in the mirror and wrestle with how selfish you truly are? And again, willfully humble, be me. Is there any relationship, anyone like that, other than marriage? I would argue that there's not. I mean, you had a friend, you can dip. I don't like you anymore. I'm going to go do other things. But in a marriage, you're with that person. If you fight on Tuesday, you wake up on Monday, they're still there. Right? If they challenge you and they accuse you of something, you eventually realize they're probably right.